Here, I'm Tracy Spears, speaker, author, and huge fan of this week's guest. That's what we're going to go with. You have met her before. Dr. Jennifer Clark is here, but I'm going to read her bio for you if you are new by chance, but also some things have changed since last time we spoke to her. So Dr. Jennifer K. Clark is a physician, educator, and thought leader who has spent over 2 decades on the front lines of medicine, pioneering the field of hospice and palliative care long before it was formally recognized. As one of the field's architects, Jennifer helped shape a new standard of care, one that centers on the human experience. With primary training in internal medicine and pediatrics, she has worked with thousands of patients across the entire age continuum and brings a rare depth of wisdom to the things that matter most and to every conversation she's in. Today, Jennifer blends science, systems thinkings, and ancient wisdom into a developmental framework for personal and collective evolution. Her signature framework, Suffer, Choose, Create, and Die, challenges conventional narratives around suffering and offers a pathway to self-actualization grounded in choice, presence, and meaning. She serves as a consultant to healthcare systems, a professor, and a sought-after speaker for leaders, clinicians, and curious humans alike. Whether addressing C-suite executives or bedside caregivers, Jennifer invites her audience into the real work of becoming, learning to suffer and suffer well. Golly, I love you so much. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Jennifer Clark.
Thank you, dear. How are you?
I'm good. I'm so good. And the audience knows how much I love and adore you. And by the way, it's 11:11 right now for those of you that care about that kind of stuff. You never had that conversation, but I just looked at the clock and there you go. No surprise. I'm so excited to talk to you today, though, because every time I talk to you, something new or big or something has happened. And I don't want to delay them hearing your voice any longer yet. I want to add this to your bio. So I send you an email and said, listen, sister, what's on your mind and all the things. This is the email I get from you, wondering what's on your mind. It's like, well, I mean, listen, whatever you want to talk about, but I'm kind of in the headspace of transpersonal experiences and how they are essential to conscious development, both theoretically and experientially. And also, what does it mean to really want, desire? How does the pleasure-pain principle support rather than ravel us? Those are the first 2 lines of what you wrote. So I love all things Jennifer Clark. Well, so what's on your mind today, sister?
Well, just those things. I mean, you also have to remember that I also sent in that email, your curiosity being like a massive superpower. So I'm always, it's one of those things when we sit in spaces, it's like, oh, what questions is she going to ask this time? Both trepidatious and like totally exciting. So, so know that underpins the energy between the two of us right now that some of you may be able to feel and some of you may be curious about. So, so those things, as you talk about, I mean, I live in the world of all of those things, suffering and creating and dying and helping people make the most important choices of their life. And so it makes a really paradoxical life to live, right? I have to live with one foot in a kind of a mysterious, kind of unknown, very existential world. And yet, I'm the mother of a 20 and a 19-year-old and married and live in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and, have a dog that's sitting outside my door kind of whimpering right now. You know what I'm saying? Like, so yeah. It's one of those things I'm constantly looking at ways that tension either gets kind of appreciated and or, kind of widened or manipulated, so I'm always looking at how my life kind of fits into those things. And I'm really, really spending a lot more time in the concept of transpersonal experiences. And we can talk about what that is and all of that.
I do want to talk about what that is. Yeah. And also catch the audience up. So, you and I have visited a few times. Yeah. It might be the first three-peat. I'm not sure. Maybe Meg Myers-Morgan. Because there's always this unpacking for me personally. And I think the audience knows this. And so I'm selfish in that I always want to talk to you about all the things that are you, but I always leave our conversations changed. And I appreciate that. There's not a lot of places where you can go and feel safe in a conversation with someone and be incredibly vulnerable and know that you're safe and I'm going to leave okay in that conversation. So I assume that is the work that you do. But that's just you being a human being, right? So have you always kind of held space for people like that?
Probably to some extent. I mean, I can probably pull out experiences across my lifetime if I really think about it. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we talk a lot about meaning and purpose and things like that. And when you can kind of understand what your life experiences have crafted for you, kind of what is your past really shaped so that your present moment kind of exists. Being a compassionate yet very, very honest, which sometimes can be hard, right? Very honest container for people to kind of feel felt.
Well, listen, I want to say that differently for the audience, because what you demand in those conversations is vulnerability because of the way you show up in that. And most people are I would imagine, are very uncomfortable in the thought of thinking back in the way with the depth that you require to stay in the conversation. And as I think about all of our conversations, I don't know that I've had that experience before, and not from a therapy standpoint. I've been to a lot of therapy. It's like, we usually go into therapy and go, I have this thing. And, so there's a little context that you talk about and all things. But you invite me and the people that you interact with to revisit that with a curiosity and without judgment. And that's what I appreciate. Like I leave there going, wow, I just talked about all the ways I have fucked this whole thing up, right? But I'm not left there feeling that you're going to feel differently about me or that I'm going to think differently about me. When you know better, you do better. And so I look back on those times with a lot of humility for sure, but also a lot, and not necessarily regret, though I do regret a lot of things, but yet with just man, I wish I would have known that, like that's usually what I'm feeling.
Love that. Yeah, I mean, as we've talked about, that's the reframing of suffering, right? Because regret and remorse, a couple of the flavors of the kind of global suffering that a lot of people feel is shame, kind of feels under that umbrella, is that it can be so collapsing because our language doesn't adequately kind of talk about it. And so I'm very grateful for you to reflect it, what I would hope to have created in writing the book Suffer that we've talked about, and that framework, and kind of really trying to name those circumstances, right, in a way that allows for compassionate curiosity, right? Not pathologizing it, which is unfortunately what the U.S. healthcare system does. We pathologize a lot of the things that are normal about being human. And so hopefully reframing that, giving, whether it's a clinical bedside or you and I in a conversation or now in a book or whatever it happens to be, that, I can create that container for people to kind of feel felt and see themselves wholly and honestly, all the good, bad, and the ugly, and that it's not bad or good. It just is. And it makes all of it makes you who you are. And so how do we honor and bring that forward?
You mentioned the book Suffer, and you talk often about suffer well. And when we did your book launch, which was that almost a year ago?
February. It was February. So half year.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to talk about what it's been like for you since, but I want to ask you a question before we go to that part. We walked out of that, and there were many people in the audience that had not read the book. And one of my very dear friends, a couple, one of them listened to the podcast. So she had context. She knew. The other was like, what in the world are y'all talking about? And so I think sometimes you and I have a tendency to go right into the deep end. And so I want to pull back just a bit and say, sure. You wrote the book Suffer, and you talk about suffering well. Tell the audience a bit more about really that book, that body of work, the journey. We started this for the audience just we said we don't want to, do too much of the last podcast yet. There's some context here that's important. And I would like to hear where you sit on this today, 6 months after the launch, like watching what that book did. And I'll go back to the question. Tell me a bit more about the book, the experience of the book, and what you hope the reader gets from that.
Yeah. It's a big question. And it's funny. It's, kind of developed and morphed kind of since the book got published and since you and I have talked and, everything. Simplest answer is that suffering is about human development and development shaped by basic needs, becoming needs, and being needs, which are all, kind of first laid out by Maslow. And suffering basically is when those needs go unmet. We have a developmental call. It's a natural part of human evolution and biology that we continue to evolve and develop. And when we don't honor that call, we suffer. And so it takes on different flavors depending on where we are in the spectrum of being a dependent being, moving to independence, interdependence, and then transcendence. And so when I take care of patients, whether they are dealing with a serious illness and having to reframe their entire concept of life and mortality, or someone who's actually approaching their own death, I have learned those lessons that they have taught me is that, oh my gosh, had I known, as you just said, I would know better, I would do better, I would have done something different in my life. And how much of that can we learn and actually evolve in those moments, either as they are dealing with a diagnosis or at the end of their life. And so my hope is to, really, it's a love letter from all the people that have taught me, whether they're my family members, my patients, my friends, or circumstances, around this idea that we have to learn to suffer well. I mean, Elie Wiesel has this beautiful, beautiful quote. For those of you who don't know who Elie Wiesel is, he's a survivor of the Holocaust, and he wrote a beautiful book called Night. And he really goes into this in this kind of longer quote about how human suffering is the biggest power of transformation that we have, and we must learn to suffer well. And so this is my attempt to kind of take all of what I've learned in my experience and put it in a book for people to kind of digest and say, okay, if I want to reclaim my own development, if I want to reclaim my own conscious presence on this planet and in this lifetime, is there a way I can do that?
So is the looking back and learning the lessons an oversimplified version of what you're saying?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that's one part of it. The framework can be used as looking at oneself. It can be used to kind of help understand your own relationship to other people and kind of how those things show up. But it's really about an opportunity to pause and do a self-assessment and say, where am I? Because, it's really interesting. So as you said, I have training in internal medicine and pediatrics, and so in the pediatric world, we are deeply invested in the childhood developmental stages. I mean, there's like documents around it. There's ways we assess it. And then by the time we turn 12, it kind of drops off. And the intensity around purposeful tracking of one's development and saying, are their developmental needs being met? But that doesn't stop at 12. That carries through until the last moment of everyone's life. And so this is an effort to kind of really take an adult version of that and say, okay, what are the developmental milestones, right?
Yes.
That I have either demonstrated or need to pay attention to and consciously say, okay, where am I? Where am I in this process?
It's not easy to do that because of what you said, the shame, the regrets, I can remember after one of our conversations, and we've not ever talked about this, but I remember, he's looking at me emotional now. I remember you left, you were at my house, and I just remember thinking, I need to fix all of it. I just remember thinking, I need to make my amends. I need to do all the things. And yet I knew what was being asked of me was to not fix it. It was to sit in it. And it was to experience that And I'm
Mm.
very grateful that you showed up on that day, as you always do for me. But just that, we were talking about you in the book and all the things, but we were talking about me, which I think that's what happens when someone, talks to you. You are a messenger, you are a conduit.
Mhm.
And I benefit greatly because I'm your good friend.
Mhm.
But everybody listening benefits, like every time you're on a podcast or the books that you're putting out, the material that you're putting out. But it demands a listener or a reader to fucking show up.
Yeah.
So that's an invitation that I know a lot of people can't accept. What do you think makes this invitation easier for someone to accept or not? Is it just being in where something has gone wrong in their life? Or do you think, Pete, that's the only time people are willing to think about suffering well?
So, so this gets to that kind of question about the experience of the book, and the whole concept of transpersonal states that we talked about at the beginning. So, most people understand transpersonal states, like in the use of psychedelics or in deep meditation or in fasting or in other ways that put us into expanded states of consciousness. And what people don't understand, and what I'm hoping becomes apparent when people pick this up as an invitation, is that they've recognized that they've encountered suffering and grief, which are their own. It's a human way of having a transpersonal experience. They are transpersonal in their nature. I mean, there's nothing like grief or deep, deep suffering to open you up, right?
I see.
And so this book really guides people through those deep, deep openings. And so typically people who, kind of I'm seeing now picking up the book are either because someone gave it to them, right, and said, hey, you need to read this, particularly the chapter on X, Y, and Z.
Right.
We're on page X, Y, and Z, right? Just read this one page for me, please. They're gifted this by someone who is bearing witness to their suffering and saying, I'm here to help, and I think this might help. So I think there's that context. And I think there's the context of people saying, oh my gosh, finally, I have some language around this profound experience, wildly painful, but profound experience in my life. And I feel weighted underneath it. I feel, kind of the natural experience of suffering is that it just takes your breath away. I mean, you feel squashed by it, kind of thing. And so people could feel immobilized. We learn, we talk about a thing called learned helplessness in the positive psychology literature, where basically we just lay down and let life happen to us. We become just passive because we just feel so, kind of weighted by life. And so it gives you the ability, the language to kind of call that out and say, yeah, but here's a potential door for you to go through it, because otherwise you get stuck underneath it. And I think that's where people's, kind of to your point, human development stops in adulthood, is that we get walloped by some event, right? We suffer some event that then leads to suffering of said suffering, right? Which is the language problem. And people confuse the experience of the event with how we actually perceive and receive said event. And depending on our development, that experience of receiving and perceiving is going to take on different flavors depending on what capacities we have to choose and create said experience to kind of move into our next becoming, our next self.
What influences your ability, your capacity, your ability to experience that? What are the influence of that?
I think one of the, kind of when you look at suffer as a concept, the next kind of concept that right now I'm writing about, you and I've talked about a lot, is the, kind of the developmental tools around choice making and wise choice making. And, I teach 20-year-olds in college, kind of freshmen, sophomore, juniors, kind of sometimes seniors, around self-development kind of thing. And, the adult markers of adulthood. So traditional, when you and I grew up, to traditional markers of adulthood where you're in a committed married relationship, you have kids, and you are financially independent. And that's been blown apart to us later Gen Xers and the millennials. So what are the markers of adulthood now? And when I talk to these 20-year-olds, I'm like, the number one marker of adulthood is to pause. The ability to be in the shit show, right? Whatever the momentary shit show is, to be able to pause in that moment and recognize a much bigger perception. That this is one moment, this is one experience within a whole context of my own life, within the context of a human life, within the context of the species, and so on and so forth, right? And that pause is an essential, and I think the primary marker of an adult development, kind of stage in human life. And so for me, constantly pausing, either formally in my own meditation practice or routinely excising myself from my life and going on retreat, so that in those practical moments, the more informal moments, I'm able to pause and remember myself, my kind of not only my sense of self and all of my, kind of machinations that you call Jennifer, to the higher self, my consciousness and my belongingness within a much bigger, greater fabric of humanity.
So the purpose of that pause is context.
Yeah. Yeah. So moving out of the content of the shit show, right? Or the loveliness or whatever situation you find yourself in, because we get caught up in good stuff as well as bad stuff. We just happen to remember the bad stuff because we're creatures of survival.
I see.
And so we have a negativity bias. It's just a kind of a natural part of being human because of the survival mechanisms that we have. But regardless of any of the experience that you're in, that you're able to pause and either understand and put it within the bigger context. In positive situations, we often talk about gratitude and loveliness and joy and awe and wonder, kind of thing. And the more difficult experiences, it's compassion. And so learning to pause and widen your perspective versus the narrow kind of sense of self that's trying to defend every moment, either clinging to a positive experience or kind of avoiding a negative experience, that you're able to move out of that and say, okay, wait, what am I doing right now? Right.
So at the age of 60, I'll reframe that. Your give a shit goes way down. Right. Like, would that be?
Or it just gets reframed, right? It's like, what do you really give a shit about, kind of to, in the introduction, what really matters most in your life, so that in that pause, you can say, does this really matter right now? I mean, in the big scheme of things, does this really matter? And if so, then how?
Yeah. If you're in the spin cycle, though, of anxiety or whatever,
Totally.
That's very hard to do. So you've answered the question I'm about to ask in one way, which is meditation. So now you know the question. So that is one way to force a pause. Is there a practice that you would also suggest for people that aren't meditators or they're not good at that? Like, what is it that you would recommend? You're in the middle of the spin cycle. What's the best thing you can do?
Yeah. In the middle of the spin cycle, right? If you don't have a practice to lean on, it's kind of hard to do. But the very first one is just take a deep breath. I mean, use the human body. Take a deep breath. I mean, because what happens when you get into the spin cycle, your nervous system is responding to stress in one of two ways. The one way everybody knows about is fight or flight. We actually engender and give privilege to that in the American culture. We hijack people's fight or flight systems and say, if you're not doing, fighting, flighting, kind of all the things that is the fight or flight. And we don't give honor to the other stress response. And it happens in a lot of people. And if we have fight or flight on this side, right, which is the arousal pathway of stress, there's dissociation on the other. And dissociation could be called feign and faint, meaning it's checking out of your body, where you're like, I'm just going to be over here. I'm just going to come, oftentimes it shows up as people pleasing at first, and then there's some sort of compliance that goes with it. And in the most catastrophic of situations where you're being attacked and fight and flight is not an option, you faint. You actually become paralyzed in the face of that as the body prepares to take on pain. this is the whole concept of playing possum. Well, humans have that exact same experience. If you talk to anybody who's been attacked and put on trial, why didn't you yell? Why didn't you scream? Why didn't you fight? Well, if your stress response system on the dissociative side has kicked in, you can't.
Interesting.
Because it's a self-protective mechanism, which is if adrenaline and cortisol is on fight or flight, the dissociative pathways is endogenous opioids.
I see.
And so if you're in this spin cycle, taking a deep breath moves you through both of those continuums. If you're in dissociation, it moves you back into your body and oftentimes can put you even into more anxiety initially, into fight or flight, that then quiets the body. So you have to get into the body to quiet it. And so helping people in those moments to kind of say, have I checked out of my body? Have I, moved over here and just kind of left my body? Right. So taking a deep breath to bring myself into my body so I can actually feel, am I angry? Am I anxious? Or am I apathetic, not feeling anything at all? And then being able to quiet and bring yourself into that moment. So if you're in that spin cycle and you don't have a practice, the only thing I can offer you right now is to take a deep breath, right? And say, okay, am my basic needs met? Am I hungry? Am I angry, anxious, or apathetic? Am I lonely, which is a common experience? Or am I tired?
Yeah.
And often it's one of those four things that's put you into the shit show to begin with.
I'm, of course, sitting here thinking of all the times I've been in both of those places. Right.
Right. But I think, there's power in talking about the dissociative pathway.
Yeah.
Because if you're out of your body, you have no emotion, you have no load with which to act, right? You're frozen in that experience. And so it's surprising to me when I talk to anybody, whether I'm doing psychospiritual advising or at the bedside or even in C-suites, like you realize you just dissociated. And there's nothing like a CEO going like, what? Right. Yeah. Not to put on the gender spectrum, but males particularly, they have been forced into fight or flight, and a lot of them are actually dissociating. And no one wants to be in that space where they have to admit that they can't fight or flight and are actually preparing themselves to take on pain. You can imagine, right, when you name that for people, it can somewhat be disquieting because you don't know unless you practice routinely of being with yourself, to your point, of sitting with that discomfort and saying, okay, where am I right now? But that requires that initial pause, and that pause can be elicited by just taking a deep breath.
I love it. And this is a random question about that.
Yeah.
In that moment when if you have dissociated, if you have,
yeah,
I mean, is your memory compromised there, or do you?
Totally.
Okay.
Totally. That's why people have a hard time. I mean, memory's weird. I mean, you and I could have a whole podcast on memory.
Let's do it. Because I just podcast with you. I think that's how this is going to
memory's an interesting thing. It's really, really flavored by intense experiences, and experiences are shaped by sensations, so sight, sound, taste, touch, smell, particularly sound and smell. So intense sensations paired with emotions and feelings, right? So, feelings are generally in the flavor of, is this good for me? Is this bad for me? Do I feel safe? Do I feel connected? It's basic needs. It's what we call the salient network. It's, okay, I'm moving towards this or I'm moving away from this, right? So the valence is, this is bad, this is good. It's the binary, very survival-based mechanism that kicks in with us. And when our survival is threatened, right, that memory can be compromised, because when you have endogenous opioids flooding your system, the survival mechanism is, let me suppress this memory so that you're not harmed. And so we get these gaps in recall. And, there's a lot of science now that started with Anthony Damasio and Bessel van der Kolk a lot of people have heard The Body Keeps the Score as a book and things like that. When we have these suppressed memories, we don't have the cognitive experience of memory, but we have the physiologic or somatic experience of memory. And so when people have transpersonal experiences, whether in therapy, in psychedelics, in fasting, in these pauses, in these resets where people are bringing up intentionally this historical narrative, whether it's done somatically or cognitively, it's still memory. And so learning to kind of understand that memory doesn't necessarily mean being able to recall images or motions and things like that. It may be a somatic experience. It may be being flooded with emotions or flooded with pain or, because the body's holding on to this intense experience that your body mind couldn't process previously. And now that it feels safe and now that it's been allowed to, again, a creative container to kind of allow the suffering to occur as a mature adult, that's what we see in these intense therapeutic experiences.
Wow. So it is there. It's your access is what's compromised.
Yeah. Yeah. Because there has been, it's a wise thing. I mean, the body mind is that's the thing is for whatever reason, we bastardize this whole concept of the sense of self and its ability to kind of maintain your survival mechanisms. And you've got to appreciate it because it's gotten you to this point, right? And it becomes kind of allowing that survival mechanism to tell its story, whether it's done verbally, cognitively, somatically, emotionally, fine, let it come out in whatever form it needs to take. Because, we collect things. We've talked about shard work,
Oh, we blew my mind with the shard work. Yeah.
Yeah. Our body minds can only take so much, particularly as we are in developmental stages. When we're young, we are exposed to ungodly things and we get overwhelmed. And when we're overwhelmed and can't process something, we leave a shard of ourselves in our past. And as we mature and are able to handle more and more intense experience, the whole breadth of them, we can go and revisit those shards and bring them forward to make us whole again. But it does require this acceptance of who am I? Where have I been? What do I need to know now? What's holding me back from developing, right? And this young part of you may be holding you in a developmental stage in the past that you need to revisit in order to move forward.
And for the audience, just the reminder is when you go back and pick up those shards and try to integrate them, it's called shard for a reason because it hurts like hell. But integrate all of that.
Yeah. It was one of those things, like I said, this whole book was a love letter to patients. And I talk about that, kind of understanding the language of shard work comes from the Native American tradition. And one of my patients was like, oh yeah, we do this, right? Life review is what happens at the end of life, which is intense. It's a beautiful, beautiful experience, but it's intense. And we all undergo it. It's a universal human experience that we undergo in life review that takes us through our entire life's experience. And she's like, yeah, we have to do that. We have to collect those things that haven't been collected yet in order for the spirit to be whole. They're named shard for a reason. It's because they're painful, they're sharp, they're pointy, and the pain of returning them is totally worth it for what you get on the other side. And so that narrative and those myths that we have, those metaphors and stories and analogies and similes and all the things that we talk about are to help us kind of work through that. And so I think it's a really beautiful metaphor.
And you have said that you've sat at the bedside of people that have done the work.
Yeah.
The people that have not done the work, and describe the difference between those two.
Oof. So, kind of to clarify what the work is, if you will, is, kind of when people die, there's a, kind of a process that we all go through. We recognize we're dying, we prepare for the process of dying. It's anticipatory planning can feel like restlessness and things. And then we undergo this life review that then leads to this experience of being enveloped in absolute unadulterated love. People call it heaven. Some people call it home. But those are the 4 parts of the dying experience that I've learned to kind of say, oh, that's what the dying teach us that are living, that we must constantly go through these cycles of removing ourselves from our day-to-day life so that we can pause and say, where am I now? Where has my life been? The ancient traditions will tell you you need to do that every quarter. Some people will tell you you need to do some of that every day. We call it recapitulation, where you just sit at the end of your day and say, what's left undone? What am I appreciative of? What do I need to carry with me going forward? What do I need to attend to that is undone, in the day? And so when we pause and separate, kind of recognizing we're dying, it's a pause. It's I need to extricate myself and, separate from my day-to-day life in order to reflect on what's going on and prepare. And when then you go through the exercise of reflection, right? So that you can be whole again and you're not stuck, or leave a part of you in the past. And so when I see people who are dying, who have never really done any of that work, you can imagine they've got lots of shards in their past, and they're all coming together because what's not done in life is done in death. And so, it's a really painful process. And one of the hardest things I have to do as a physician is to sit with and bear witness to people's suffering, because it happens. All of it catches up at some point. And so when people are exposed to death and dying, either being threatened with their own life and going through this and experiencing this to some extent because their mortality is being called into question with a serious illness, or someone who's with that person and going through grief and all of those kind of things, this is that work. It's like, oh my gosh, had I known better, right? And so it does offer this transpersonal experience and opens you to saying, okay, I have a much bigger perspective now in my life. What needs to be attended to? And if it's not, then it can be physically painful. It can be psychologically and spiritually painful. It's an existential crisis that, I've got meds to help you kind of manage that. But most of the work that I do is sitting and just bearing witness so people don't have to go through it by themselves.
Is time related to this? Is there when people are, I don't know what you thought I asked, but I want to hear that because of your reaction. When my mom and grandmother both died, they said they'll die instantly when you take them off life support, and they didn't. And my grandmother, there was this very long days, just very deep breathing, and for 2 or 3 days, and they were like, we don't know why she should have already transitioned. And I'm now, is this related to that in any way?
Totally. So I think,
interesting.
Gosh, oh my gosh, we haven't talked about this. This is going to be interesting. So you'll have to decide kind of how much you want to go down this rabbit hole. But when people approach the experience of death, their developmental continuum matters, where they sit on that continuum of being dependent and independent, interdependent, transcendent.
Okay.
Though it's not a blanket statement, I've seen it very commonly in women who are in the silent generation, so people who kind of World War II-ish, and the baby boom generation who were subject to traditional gender roles of femininity, where they had to basically obliterate their sense of self to be whatever their spouse or their children or their family required them to be. And so they never developed a sense of self. They never really truly moved into an independent state. They just went from, the childlike dependence to codependence, where their sense of existence was defined by external experiences. And so as a result, there was no awareness of oneself, much less one's suffering. And so they come to the end of life and they linger and languish because they don't know where to go. They don't know who they are. They're waiting for someone to tell them.
Oh, wow.
And so their life reviews is kind of meandering and languishing that often it's the body then that has to die, like go through the absolute last dying process and quiet, if you will, in order to release whatever consciousness that this person is. That's why the physical process is what dictates it versus a psychological or spiritual process leading the way, depending on where you are in that developmental continuum.
Because the brain can't direct the body to transition. The body is left to atrophy and do it over time. Am I saying that right? Or help me?
Yeah. So what people don't, so for, because we've privileged thinking and our psychological kind of experience is privileged, we think that relates to the brain. Well, the brain actually, body,
okay.
Right?
Thank you.
So it's the mind, right? So it's the sense of self actually is the kind of fulcrum, if you will. That when people have a clear sense of self, their self-identity, when they enter into death, they understand kind of where that begins and ends, and it becomes more psychologically driven. And people who approach death, who have moved through independence and into interdependence and have touched into the transcendent function of being human, their dying experience is very, very different and is predicated on this more kind of, the science word for it is consciousness. The religious experience of it is soul or spirit kind of thing. It's kind of cool now. Science actually doesn't deny this experience anymore. We actually are just trying to understand it better.
Yeah.
People live from that perspective of development. Their dying experience is markedly different.
And the brain is the body, and I understand that, and the soul is separate in the spirit. So thank you for the correction there. When I also think about the work that you do and the space that that you occupy and the transition of that for somebody to go into that, does it make you? And I probably asked you this before, yet I'm still obviously thinking about it. What's the emotion? So now let's put you back in your body. Do you feel, and for your own transition, do you feel ready? Not that you're ready to go. I'm just saying, do you feel like listen, I totally get it and I understand. What's it like for you?
Me personally, is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
So one of the privileges of caring for dying people particularly is a developmental experience called mortality salience. And Abraham Maslow, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, he really talked about this towards the end of his life because he was really young when he died. He was in his 60s from a heart attack, and he had had heart failure and several things that brought him to the brink of the death prior to. And in his understanding of self-actualized people, he then came to understand that when you move through the developmental continuum and you touch more and more into this transcendent aspect of our existence, the fear of death goes away. Mm. And mortality salience is the formal practice of that. You hear that in the Stoic tradition called memento mori, or die before you die. And so every tradition talks about it. Every wisdom tradition, whether it's religious or philosophical, have some sort of version of mortality salience. That's the current psychological term for it. And so, just give me a second. I just had a wave of gratitude and awe and wonder of when my mortality salience became the primary viewpoint from which I lived life, and the fear of death went away. I was very early in my palliative care training, and one of my teachers, who I talk about in the book, gifted me a container to experience that.
We're still here. That are listening. I'm feeling that too. And if you want to comment further on that, do. If not, I'm going to take you in a different direction.
I think that's why I'm so sad, I guess is the appropriate emotion, that we are so afraid of death, that people are, because of the taboos around it. And we can talk about why that exists, particularly in modern day America. That when you experience grief, when you're with someone who is dying, and that grief totally changes you. I mean, it's one of the most profound emotional experiences. I mean, it totally changes your brain chemistry and how you interact. And it's a transpersonal experience that that's how you practice. That's what the gift of the dying gift of living is, the practice of being able to die before you die, kind of as you walk that path with others. And if you've never done that or been in that space before your time, how do you think it's going to go?
Yeah.
And so I was, had developed a contemplative practice, kind of very early in my life. We've talked about previously, that then took on this tool of imagining and practicing what it would be like to be on my deathbed. And I take people through that exercise in the book, and I've taken, at this point, thousands of people through that exercise to help them say, okay, at the end of my life, what do I want present in the room? What's the experience I want to have? Because if that's what you want at the end, then you got to start working on it now, because that doesn't happen by magic. You have to be conscious of it.
So the book Suffer and all the things that we're talking about now, you have mentioned you're working on your next book. Mm-hmm. And let's just to talk for a moment about that, because you have 3 more in you. And when you started this journey, and you still call yourself the conduit, and things just are coming to you right now. What are the next 3 books? And then I'm going to ask you about psychedelics.
Thanks for the warning shot. So Suffer is the first part, because Suffer is the primary compass, right? So it's and as people have read it, it's very, very dense. It's the kind of necessary, kind of in the Star Wars trilogy, it's the necessary prequels. Right. So it lays
a good analogy. That's a good analogy.
And so the next 2 are kind of the juice of the matter with regards to human development. So the first one is choose, right? So we've Suffer, choose, create, and then die. And choose and create really get into these adult markers. This, what I'll call right now is the terms I'm using. I don't know if it'll end up this will be the end of being in the book, but the framework is there has to be some psychological agility that really is what the basis of choosing is, kind of what are the psychological pieces of self-development, right? So there's the sense of self that has to emerge and be grown so that it can ultimately be transcended. And how does that one choose and move through self-development in those choices, right? The capacities to pause is one of the biggest ones, right? Oh. The next one would be perception, and so on and so forth.
Can I ask you about that? I had a group in here yesterday, and I can't remember what we were talking about. We were in a strategic planning session, and someone said, that some people don't have the voice, the inner critic that's narrating what's happening. And I Googled it. I can't remember the term of it, and I'm throwing you a curve here.
Yeah, no, it's good.
It said something like 20 to 30% of the people walking around this earth don't have an internal voice that they listen to, that they can only access that knowing by using visual images or something outside of self. Do you know anything about that?
Here's my understanding of it.
Okay.
So this is coming from a combination of direct experience at the bedside, psychological development around what we call the sense of self or the ego, and then understanding how the experience of consciousness, which is the essence of who we are, kind of plays into that. So as a dependent being, so in the developmental stages of dependence, as a child, we are born and we have a very minimal sense of self. And, and some people say we start having some of the inclinations around I'm not my mother. I'm not enmeshed with the environment, right? So we call it a dual in the spiritual traditions, meaning as an infant, we we believe that we're subsumed into our mother. We don't feel any differentiation. When we start seeing stranger danger and things like that, we understand that we're separate from our mother. Like there's some sort of inclination of a separateness that occurs. And that's when the sense of self really starts developing. And by the time we're 8 to 9, we know that we have a rudimentary sense of self, right? But depending on our family circumstances, that sense of self, depending on who the adults are in our life, may be fostered in its development or may be squashed. And I would say that the 20 to 30% of people are people who, like, you were talking about your grandmother and your mother, kind of thing, that have not been allowed to develop a sense of self separate from their families. Meaning they bend themselves and contort themselves into whatever anybody else needs them to be. And so they're just ignorant to their, it's the suffering of ignorance is what we talk about. Not stupidity. Ignorance is just a not knowing of self, right? And so as a result, they don't have an observer. They don't have this sense of self having an opinion about things. They just get flooded with emotion and are taken by, they're enmeshed with other people around them. So there's that person. And
I know that person.
You know exactly what I'm talking about,
Yeah,
right?
I've met that. I know now the context of that. And in that it's hard to get a beat on that person because they're
Shape-shifting constantly.
Yeah. So is that person more likely to take on the views of the people that are close to them, and that's why you don't feel like you know them? Like it's okay.
It's whoever's the most prominent person in the room, particularly as it applies to their surviving that circumstance.
Thank you.
Okay. And then there's another set of people who have a highly developed sense of self. They fundamentally know who they are. They've moved from deficiency into growth, which is, kind of when you look at the developmental continuum, this is between independence and interdependence, meaning I'm really curious and can kind of, to your point earlier, really curious about life, and I'm willing to take risks in order to learn about myself, right? And hold the paradox of what that means, meaning I have this truth, but there's this truth and they're conflicting, but I can hold the two of them at the same time. And being able to kind of translate that and live with that tension. And that turns on the transcendent function in a way that you purposely move into that. And when people move further and further into transcendent functions, we now start getting into the spiritual traditions of around people walking around with a high level of interdependence and transcendence at times. We talk about
in both worlds. Is that what you're saying?
They understand that sense of self is a tool that can be picked up and let go of, and that it's not fundamentally who they are. It's a tool by which they can navigate the material world, but they don't identify with it.
Oh, wow.
And that's a very different experience than the one you're talking about, right?
Yes.
Those are rare people in our world today, but they're there,
Yeah, I know. So I'm going to take you back. So the choose and create, and
yeah,
those are coming next. Do you want to touch on? I know we're close to our time. That's even true. That man. I think I'm the boss of my own podcast. So whatever. So pause here and go and do what you need to do and come back.
Yeah.
So when the psychedelic piece to that is
sure.
the accelerant, right? Isn't that what it is, to access things in a faster, different way? Is that oversimplified?
So it's a purposeful. It's invoking a purposeful transpersonal experience. Right.
Yes.
And we have lots of methods for that. We touched on a lot of them. So mortality is one of them, right? So being around death and dying, experiencing grief and loss and all of those kind of things, those are transpersonal experiences. Meditation is a big one. Mother Nature is another one.
Yes.
as you can see, I love alliteration. So anything that starts with M. So medicines, right? So medicine can be everything from therapy that you talked about. So therapy can be a transpersonal experience and open our brains up and things like that. Fasting, this is why we fast. This is why Lent exists, why Eid exists, and, kind of Ramadan and all the fasting experiences. That's why every religious tradition has those experiences. So fasting can do that. And then medicines that we just talked about, and there's several others kind of thing. And so when people are wanting to enter into this pause in their life and do an assessment, right? And it typically happens in second adolescence, which is, kind of...
I just pictured you sitting in my living room for some reason.
Yeah. Second adolescence is, kind of we have primary adolescence, which is, puberty and all of those kind of things. Second adolescence has been highly focused on menopause for whatever reason. But it's that period of time that all of us, regardless of gender, experience kind of in our late 30s to 40s. As we move from young adulthood to mature adulthood, there is physical, psychological, and spiritual changes that are just as powerful as primary, if not arguable, more powerful than primary adolescence. And so people oftentimes will look to psychedelics at that point. And if you look at wisdom traditions, that's actually when tribes participate. So people going through second adolescence take the medicines with people going through primary adolescence to translate the wisdom traditions and bring and welcome the children into adulthood, right?
Love that. I love that connection.
Yeah, it just gave me chills kind of thinking about it. So psychedelics in the Western tradition, in the scientific tradition, which is what's happening right now. We're having a psychedelic renaissance, and a lot of people may have heard about psilocybin and ketamine and MDMA and ayahuasca and peyote and, all of the mescaline, kind of traditional psychedelic therapies. People are really engaging in this, in using these medicines to experience transpersonal life and get a bigger perspective. But one of the things that we tend to do in the Western medicine world is kind of make things pathological. So people enter into it from a therapy standpoint that I'm broken. Mm. And yes, we see some significant, kind of improvement in PTSD and depression and anxiety. And so there's a therapeutic arm of it for sure. But there's also a developmental, if we look at medicine as rescue and recovery, prevention and promotion, and then there's flow and flourishing, that aspect of health can be really fostered in the use of psychedelic exploration and therapy by inducing these transpersonal states. But it has to be done very carefully.
Sure.
And done in a way that doesn't blow someone's life up, right? It allows them to dip into these transpersonal spaces in order to see kind of where am I in this developmental continuum? What is my purpose in this life? How is it that I can be in these kind of wise end of human life to help the next generations to come? And so it's profound work supported by all these other kind of practices of mortality, salience, and meditation, and being in nature. All of the other kind of transpersonal like experiences helps integrate those big prominent ones that can be induced in psychedelic experience.
Well, I want to do it. And as you describe it, and you said, you don't want to blow your life up. That's what's the only thing that's kept me from doing that before.
Right.
And the lifeline to that is there is a method to that. You don't just want to go away on a weekend and, because you will come back with all of this.
It's going to be changed. Yeah. You will be changed. And, kind of, again, that's a big pause. That's, kind of creating space for that. And what does that look like? It's really helpful to have someone who's been through that experience and can understand and help prepare for and then integrate that into your life so it doesn't become one of the shards, because I've seen psychedelic experiences not shaped appropriately end up a shard because it was too overwhelming for someone who wasn't appropriately prepared.
So this, obviously, I'm going to ask this question then. So that's the work for you in the future, is to help with that. And as you know, I'm signing up for that. And yet we've also had a conversation about how do we both maybe create some of those experiences for people, me just being the MC and like the greeter and you do heavy lifting. I want to do that. We have to do it.
We have to do it. Yeah. I mean, that's the whole thing, kind of one of the other methods of creating transpersonal experiences is being in community, right? Where you're actually coming together and meditating together, literally or figuratively, but taking time to purposely pause in a group. There's power in that. And if you introduce medicine into it, it's a whole nother ball of wax that says, not only am I willing to do my life's work, I'm also willing to share that with others and understand that the people that are with me in these times of pausing actually allow me to be mirrors. That would be the M for that, so mirroring is another transpersonal experiences. And that's why deep, as you know, important relationships are a key component to being in a human life, is that transpersonal experiences can happen with the mirrors that we choose to bring into our spaces. And so doing that in community consciously with people is a really, really powerful way in order to prepare and potentially participate in a psychedelic experience.
Speaking of Shannon, so Shannon, so for those of you, my partner is a chef. And so this is the dream. We'll just tell everyone, like we're talking about. So she is the, nurturing of the body and all the things, and does all the food. And you're doing you, which is this podcast for 2 or 3 days. I don't know yet. And I'm doing me, which is asking all the questions. I was about to say the right questions. You can't, I don't know if they are there. But I think that would be really interesting. And so as you're listening to this, if you're still here and you have any desire in this, reach out to me. Let me know. We'll put you on the list of people that, because it will be by invitation only, right? You have to highly curate this group. And we're really thinking about what that next step is. So listen, as we end here, and I hate the word, this is not the end, as we pause here, you have a new website out today. Tell us about the new website and all the things.
Oh God. You asked that question, you were asking me what we wanted to talk about today. And one of the other things is that, this tension between like all this stuff that I deal with that's very heady and kind of otherworldly, and then the practical things of, kind of life. And so, this whole new identity of being an author and writing and the experience of a creative life is weird for me. And I love that piece and the actual submersion of that. But the practicalities and the logistics of living said life and trying to communicate that in a material world is not something I'm very good at. And so my publisher, the book won an award. And he recommended that we rebrand way people can find out about me, instead of my kind of just simple, hey, this is where you can get the book and all of that kind of stuff. And so he introduced me to a lovely organization by the name of Brand Alchemy. Kerry James and his team, a lot of serendipitous kind of meetings, really helped craft this new website and kind of all the social media stuff. And Curtis Sprague, shout out to Curtis, who's a photographer here in Tulsa, who took the photos, because that was not an experience that I'm used to doing. They did a wonderful job. And so now there's JenniferKClarkMD.com that people can kind of do a deep dive into a lot of the things you and I talked about. And it gives people a way to contact me in order to do all of that.
And you were awarded the 2025 Nautilus Gold for Inner Prosperity and Right Livelihood. Is that right? I'm sorry I didn't mention that already.
Good.
Yeah. So you're so casual. You're like, oh, well, I mean, I'm kind of want a little. And so as I went and looked at that, I was like, what? And then I was like, oh, of course. So I have, I had both of those like excited reactions, but then of course, why aren't there more? That's that's not like there will be more. And so I love that. So the website though is really kind of all things Jennifer Clark, and
Yeah.
a place to do a little bit of exploring. I looked at the site a bit. And listen, if they want to contact you, is that the best way for people to reach out to you?
Probably, yeah. I think it's the best way. I mean, obviously, I'm in Instagram, and it's just Jennifer K. Clark, MD, and we did Jennifer K. Clark, MD, because there's, as you can imagine, a ton of Jennifer Clarks, and there happens to be a Jennifer K. Clark that's a romance author, and so we had to add the MD. I mean, all the things, right? I'm like,
That's funny. There's a Tracy Spears in Tulsa that's an esthetician that does facials. And so yeah, I had to go to her because Tracy Spears, she's like, girl, she goes, you don't know how many people call me and want to motivate. You need to do a motivational talk for them. People want me to do a facial for them. So I had to come meet you. So yeah.
That's so funny. But
well, listen, thank you for your time today. Is there anything else as we hang up that we didn't cover that you want to make sure we do?
oh gosh, no, I would think we covered a lot, my friend. I'm sure there'll be more.
We're going to do it again. I do think that, we are manifesting this because early on I said at some point I can see myself just talking to you on my podcast. And there's like, there's like 3 or 4 people that I'm just like, every week I'll talk to a different one and record it for my own pleasure. And then if you want to listen to it, they can. And you're definitely you're at the top.
I appreciate that. Oh, that's fun.
Listen, I love you. I appreciate you. And we'll do it again soon.
Sounds good.